There's a feeling most people never name, not pain, not failure, just a quiet suspicion that the life you're living doesn't actually belong to you. You keep going, you keep performing, you keep showing up for everyone. But somewhere beneath all that noise, something is waiting, something you've been postponing for a very long time. Yourself. Here's what no one tells you about success. You can win every game the world gives you and still feel like you lost. Not because something went wrong, but because you were playing someone else's game. Carl Jung, one of the most profound psychologists who ever lived, noticed something unsettling. The ones who suffered the most weren't the ones who had failed. They were the ones who had succeeded at becoming who everyone else wanted them to be. Think about your own day. How many decisions did you make because they felt right to you? And how many did you make because you knew they'd be accepted? Most people never ask this question, and that silence, that avoidance, is where the slow emptiness begins. Jung had a name for it. He called it the persona. Not a flaw, not a weakness, a psychological structure you built so quietly. You forgot you built it at all. It started in childhood. Smile when you're uncomfortable. Be strong when you're afraid. Agree when you want to push back. At first, it protected you. It helped you fit in. It kept you safe. But here's where it gets dangerous. Over time, you stopped seeing it as a mask. You started believing it was you. And that's when the real crisis begins. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow, quiet erosion. A feeling that even when you're alone, you're still performing for an audience that isn't there. Here's what comparison actually does to you. Every time you measure yourself against someone else, you hand them your compass, your direction, your worth, your definition of enough, and you'll never win this game because there will always be someone ahead, someone more polished, more successful, more visible. Jung called this living by the collective map, walking through a forest, following the crowd, not because it's your direction, but because you've lost your own, and the cost isn't a breakdown. It's subtler than that. It's waking up one day and realizing you can't remember the last time you made a choice that was purely, quietly, completely yours. Jung believed every person carries a shadow, not evil, not darkness in the dramatic sense, just the parts of yourself you learned to hide, the anger you were told was too much, the sensitivity you were told was weakness, the dreams you were told were unrealistic. You didn't destroy those parts, you buried them. And here's what happens. When you bury something alive, it doesn't die. It grows underground. It shapes your fears. It drives your reactions. It becomes the voice that says, you're not good enough. And because that voice feels too painful to face, you project it outward. You assume others are judging you. You assume the world sees your flaws. But the world you fear most is almost always the mirror of what you haven't dared to face within yourself. Most people are terrified of silence, not because being alone is painful, but because of what surfaces when there's no one left to distract you. The questions you've been avoiding, the sadness you couldn't name, the version of yourself you abandoned. Jung called solitude, sacred space, the only place where the soul can speak without being drowned out. You cannot integrate what you deny, and you cannot hear yourself while performing for others. So, here's the question that matters. When was the last time you sat in complete silence and actually listened? Not to music, not to a podcast, not to anyone else's voice, just yours. Real growth is almost always invisible. No applause, no audience, no dramatic transformation overnight. Just quiet, consistent choices made when no one is watching. There is no universal path, only your rhythm. These moments don't trend, they don't get likes, but they compound. And one day, you realize you're no longer swept by every wave of opinion or comparison. You've grown roots. Here's the paradox. Jung spent his entire life studying. The moment you stop seeking your place in the world no longer has the power to shake you. Not because you've become cold, not because you've stopped caring, but because your worth is no longer stored in someone else's opinion of you. It lives inside you now, immovable, quiet, yours. What started as a crisis becomes a return, a very quiet return, from living outside yourself to living inside yourself. You only need one thing now to live in alignment with what is moving most deeply within you. The people who focus on themselves genuinely, quietly, deeply are often the ones who show up most fully for others, not because they're performing, not because they're seeking approval, but because they're finally present, solid, rooted, awake. So the question isn't whether you should focus on yourself. The question is, how long will you keep waiting? Not to rebel, not to isolate, simply to stop abandoning yourself every time the world asks you to become someone else. Because somewhere along the way, many people learned that love had conditions, that acceptance had requirements, that belonging meant adaptation, so they became experts at reading rooms, at sensing moods, at becoming whatever version of themselves would disturb people the least. And slowly, without realizing it, they disappeared. Not physically, internally, quietly, piece by piece, until one day when they wake up exhausted from carrying personalities that were never truly theirs. And this exhaustion is deeper than physical tiredness. It's soul exhaustion, the fatigue of constantly editing yourself to survive. Maybe you've felt it, that strange heaviness after being around people, that feeling that you performed connection instead of experiencing it. Because when you abandon yourself long enough, your body remembers, even when your mind keeps pretending. And eventually, something inside begins to resist, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet inner voice that whispers, enough. Enough pretending you're okay, enough shrinking, enough betraying your own instincts to keep everyone comfortable. This is the moment. Most people misunderstand because awakening doesn't always look beautiful. Sometimes it first appears as confusion, distance, loneliness, emotional exhaustion. The old life stops fitting before the new self is fully born. And in that in-between space, as people often panic, they think something is wrong with them, but many times nothing is wrong. You're simply becoming aware of how disconnected you've been. from yourself. Awareness changes everything. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. You begin noticing how often you silence yourself, how quickly you apologize for existing, how deeply you've depended on external approval to feel safe. And this realization hurts, because the truth is painful. A person who never learned to value themselves internally will spend years trying to purchase worth through performance, through achievement, through relationships, through being needed, through never disappointing anyone. But no amount of praise can heal self-abandonment, and no relationship can permanently rescue someone who keeps leaving themselves behind. At some point, the healing becomes personal, private, internal. You stop asking, "How do I make them understand me?" And you begin asking, "Why have I stopped understanding myself?" That question changes lives, because now the focus shifts inward. You begin sitting alone more, not from sadness, but from necessity. You begin protecting your energy, not from arrogance, but from awareness. You become quieter, more observant, less reactive. And people may misunderstand this version of you. Some will call you distant, others will say you've changed. But they often say this when you've finally stopped being emotionally available for your own destruction. Growth changes social dynamics. It always does. The version of you that over-explained everything was easier to control. The version that constantly needed validation was easier to predict. But a person who has started listening to themselves becomes harder to manipulate, because they no longer abandon their inner truth for temporary acceptance. And that changes everything. You stop chasing, stop forcing, stop proving. You stop trying to convince people to choose you, because you finally understand real connection does not require self-betrayal. And slowly, your nervous system begins to soften. The constant anxiety fades. The endless mental noise quiets. For the first time in years, you can hear yourself think. You can feel yourself breathe. You can sit in silence without needing distraction. This is not emptiness. This is return. A return to your own center. A return to the part of you that existed before fear taught you to become someone else. And strangely, the more connected you become to yourself, the less desperate you become for external attention, because attention is not the same as love, and validation is not the same as peace. Many people spend their entire lives confusing the two. They chase applause while feeling empty inside. They collect followers while feeling unseen. They stay surrounded by people while emotionally alone, because external noise cannot replace internal connection. Only truth can do that. Only presence, only self-respect. And self-respect is built quietly, in small moments, in the moments where nobody is watching. When you say no, even when guilt appears. When you rest without earning it first. When you stop explaining your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. When you finally trust what your intuition has been trying to tell you for years. This is where inner strength begins, not in dominance, not in perfection, but in honesty, real honesty. The kind that asks, what parts of my life are built on fear? That question is uncomfortable, because many people build entire identities around avoiding rejection, and eventually They forget who they are underneath it all, but underneath the performance, there is still a self waiting, patiently, quietly, a self that does not need to be louder to be worthy, a self that does not need to become extraordinary and to deserve love, a self that is already enough without exhausting itself trying to prove it. And perhaps this is the real transformation, not becoming someone new, but finally stopping the war against who you've always been. Because healing is not adding more layers, it is removing the false ones, the masks, the roles, the endless adaptations, until eventually you can look at your own life and recognize yourself again. And when that happens, something extraordinary begins to unfold. You stop living reactively. You stop making choices based only on fear. You begin creating a life that actually reflects your inner world. Your relationships change, your priorities change, even your definition of success changes, because peace becomes more valuable than performance. Depth becomes more important than attention, and authenticity becomes more attractive than approval. This is why some people become quieter as they heal, not because they've lost themselves, but because they've finally found themselves. There is no longer a need to constantly announce their worth. They feel it internally now, steady, grounded, real. And maybe this is what you've been searching for all along. Not perfection, not endless productivity, not universal approval, just the ability to return home to yourself without shame, to wake up without feeling disconnected from your own soul, to exist without constantly performing existence. That kind of peace changes a person, because once you've experienced what it feels like to truly belong to yourself, you stop settling for relationships, places, and identities that require your self-abandonment. You begin choosing differently, speaking differently, living differently, not from ego, but from alignment. And alignment feels strange at first, because chaos was once familiar, overgiving was familiar, emotional survival was familiar. But peace can feel unfamiliar to a nervous system that spent years in survival mode. So be patient with yourself. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are learning how to exist without betraying yourself. And that takes time. It takes awareness, courage, stillness. But most importantly, it takes willingness. The willingness to finally stop running from yourself. Because everything changes the moment you do. The moment you stop searching outside for what can only be built within. The moment you realize that your relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life. And perhaps that's why this journey matters so deeply, because the people who truly reconnect with themselves often become safer for others too. More present, more compassionate, more real. Not because they're trying to appear wise, but because they are no longer fragmented inside. There is integrity now, inner coherence, a quiet kind of wholeness, and in a world where so many people are disconnected from themselves, someone who is deeply connected feels rare, calming, almost magnetic, not because they seek attention, but because truth has presence, real presence, the kind that cannot be manufactured, only lived. So maybe this moment, this exact season of your life is not falling apart. Maybe it's the beginning of finally returning to the person beneath the conditioning, the person beneath the fear, the person beneath the performance, the real you, still there, still waiting, still alive beneath all the noise. And maybe now you're finally ready to meet them, to listen. Drop a comment below if this felt like something you needed to hear today.